that would be one way to look at it, and there's other ways to look at it. You can see that if there is if you are part of, we're all part of a collective, collective shared value sphere or belief system. But if you are attached to, if you're consciously and unconsciously attached to the way things have been, for whatever reason, because of identifying with certain ethnic convictions and beliefs, certain religious convictions and beliefs, certain cultural religious convictions, certain cultural convictions and beliefs, certain personal convictions and beliefs, and something new that actually is higher enters the picture. But that which is higher then would be perceived as a threat. It's perceived as a threat to all these old structures and ways of being and seeing. So then that which is actually higher, and that which is the manifestation of a higher level of development and potential, is perceived as being a threat. And then, as human beings have always done, tribes, cultures, nations, individuals, then they can often strike out and want to bring it down, destroy it. So, even then the question of what's evil depends on the perspective of where you're seeing it from. So you could say, well, it's evil because then it's inhibiting and destroying that which is higher. So, for example, Martin Luther King was assassinated. He's considered to be a saint by many people. Or Gandhi was assassinated because they were ushering in a higher level of inclusion, of human inclusion, which was perceived by so many people as a big threat to the way the world had been running for thousands of years. So from the perspective of the perceived threat, for those individuals who saw them as a threat, saw them as a manifestation of evil, because they were going to destroy the status quo. What we determine as being good or not really depends upon what our standards are and how high we're actually shooting here, how high we're aspiring to go. So it's a sliding scale. It's not the same scale for everyone. So that's why it's very imperative that we work to make the effort to cultivate a very clear, moral, philosophical, spiritual perspective, orientation to live by, to perceive the world through a context in which to share life with other people. Otherwise, most determinations will be relative. There are extreme acts of evil that I think are universally accepted and understood to be. So those aside, everything does get quite relative pretty quickly. So that's why we have to figure out, well, what's the context in which we're going to actually answer these questions? Here, the context is the aspiration for a very high level of development. So we're trying to really reach for something new, purposeful, meaningful, and all the rest of it. Well, for example, like in Buddhism, Buddhism has their own law, has their own views on this. So in Buddhism, I think the worst possible crime you can commit is killing a Buddha. Now, why is that? So in that particular way of looking at things, a Buddha is the emanation and living manifestation of the highest potential there is in the universe, as far as we know. So from their perspective, you're destroying that potential. That's committing the worst possible crime that sentient beings could ever commit. So, but that's from the perspective of the Buddhist aspiration, in which enlightenment is the highest human ideal. So that makes sense in that particular context, where it's a recognition of a shared ideal. And I think the second in Buddhism is creating a schism, a rupture, in the Sangha. The Sangha in Buddhist orientation are all those individuals that share the same aspiration for enlightenment and for this higher spiritual ideal and potential at that point at the level of shared culture. So if you're sharing the belief in higher potentials and the conviction and the aspiration for higher potentials within a group of individuals, a shared group is the Sangha, that means all those individuals are sharing an aspiration for a higher possibility than most people outside that gathering share. So just the fact that they've come together to share in the conviction of a higher potential is delicate because they're already challenging the status quo because they're choosing to come together in their shared conviction of a higher potential, right? So that's a very delicate situation because everybody's making the spiritual effort, the spiritual effort to uphold and hold to a higher perspective and a higher potential in a world context, in a cultural context, in a world context where other people don't see it. So that's already a very delicate thing to do. So if you can getting a group of people together that actually believe and are trying to put into practice a higher and even ultimate utopian ideal is a delicate business. So you can see if an individual would create a schism or a rift or a tear in that delicate structure, which is very delicate because it's higher, so it's not solid yet. That's considered to be one of the worst crimes, and you can see why, because there's a new cultural structure that for example a Buddha would be trying to create with real people that's based upon a shared conviction that has the evolutionary potential. That of course is you can't measure it. It's enormous. And so then you can see even more from that perspective why transcending the ego, the narcissistic self-sense, becomes an evolutionary imperative. Because if we don't make the effort to transcend our narcissistic inclinations, then the body-mind, self, will be trapped in that world and will not be able to be an agent for the evolutionary impulse